Hello everybody, welcome. We're back in Kerbalized Realism, covering Gemini docking missions 8 through 12. It's February 13th, 1968, from LK-14 in Cape Canaveral, Florida. The Sith Agave target vehicle sits atop an orc, headed to low orbit, where it'll wait for Sith 7 to launch and dock with it. Docking is a final step before we can put Kerbals on the moon. The fairing doesn't deploy cleanly, hanging up on one side. Being similar to Gemini 9, after 9's target vehicle failed, the NASA kind of rigged up a new target vehicle without the Agena engine, leading to the fairing not deploying. Some wires and straps didn't let go, not allowing them to dock. Unlike NASA, our fairing does finally detach. Back to Gemini 8. They were able to dock, but had a wild ride, unfortunately for the video. But fortunate for our Kerbals, we don't experience what they did. Not long after docking, they noticed the two craft were slightly tilted and were slowly starting to roll. Thinking it must be an issue with the docking craft, they undocked, only to find out it was their craft. It started rolling and increasing in rotation, getting to roughly 360 degrees per second, with the severe risk of blacking out or possible death. Neil Armstrong was able to reach the controls using the reaction control thrusters in the opposite direction of the spin. He was able to stop it, although using up most of the fuel, they were forced to make an emergency re-entry. Back to Gemini 9. Even though they couldn't dock, there was other experiments and demonstrations to do, like moving away from the target craft, then reapproaching from other angles, coming in from below, moving away, and then realigning from the top. Also, the Americans only had one spacewalk, where it was more just free floating around. Now was the time to prove it was possible to do actual work. Plan was to have Eugene Cernan get out, move to the rear of the craft, and test an AMU, Astronaut Maneuvering Unit, a backpack very similar to a Kerbals wear. It has its own propulsion, stabilization system, oxygen, and telemetry for biomedical data. It used hydrogen peroxide for propellant. As Cernan moved to the back of the craft, he found his suit to be very stiff and uneasy to move, saying it had the flexibility of a rusty suit of armor. There was a lack of hand and foot holds that made it hard to gain any leverage to be able to turn any valves or even perform any basic movement. After becoming extremely exhausted and having a raised blood pressure and sweat dripping in his eyes, burning his vision, the spacewalk was called off, and he was never able to use the AMU. The EVA lasted for 2 hours and 7 minutes. Gemini 10 with John Young and Michael Collins set for 2 EVAs, a docking, and a rendezvous with the dead leftover Agena from Gemini 8. On first rendezvous, they wanted to try to eyeball it with a sextant, but the sextant didn't work. Collins mistook airglow as a horizon, causing them to have to make extra burns, using up 60% of the fuel. NASA decided it would be best to stay docked to the Agena and use it for altitude, attitude control, probably both. They used the Agena to boost them into a high orbit, 159 by 421 nautical miles, 294 by 763 kilometers, being the highest humans have been until Gemini 11, which will go even higher. While in the high orbit, they got into the Van Allen belts, also passing through the South Atlantic anomaly. They did 3 experiments for radiation. MSC3, the tri-axis magnometer, which measured the levels in the South Atlantic anomaly. MC6, a beta spectrometer, which needs a container, which it measured the potential doses of radiation for Apollo missions. And I'm going to butcher this one, but MSC-7, a Bremsstrahlung spectrometer, which detected radiation fluxes as the function of energy when the spacecraft passed through the South Atlantic anomaly. After an 8-hour rest, they used the Agena to lower down into the same orbit as the Gemini 8's Agena. The first EVA is merely to open the hatch, stand upright out the door, and take pictures with a 70mm general all-purpose Hasselblad camera. They took images of the southern Milky Way. After an orbital sunrise, Collins photographed a color plate on the side of the craft to see if the colors would be reproduced accurately in space. Sometime after undocking from the Agena, the crew thought they were seeing Agena 8. It turned out to be their own, only 3 miles or 5.5 kilometers away. The target was actually 95 miles or 176 kilometers away. At 16 miles away, it looked like a faint star, and the next thing they knew, it was 10 feet away. They found it to be very stable and in good condition. For the second EVA, Collins is tasked with retrieving 2 micrometeorite collectors, one from their craft and one from the stranded Agena. Float away from both the Gemini craft and the Agena to have Young translate the craft over to a passive Collins. Then end with Collins attaching a tether between the Gemini and the Agena to perform some orbital maneuvers. Collins experienced some of the same difficulties as Eugene Cernan did, trying to get to the back of the craft to retrieve S12, the micrometeorite collector, not to mention the massive 50-foot umbilical cord he had. Although, to transverse over to the Agena, Collins had a handheld maneuvering unit, much like Ed White had on America's very first spacewalk. On his first attempt to grab hold, he tried to grab the docking cone, but found it was too smooth and had no grip. He floated back towards the Gemini and then back again, this time able to grab hold of some wires and retrieve the micrometeorite collector, S10. With the Gemini craft being so low on fuel, they scrubbed the attempt of a passive pickup and the tether maneuvers. It took the crew 8 minutes to close the hatch, mostly due to dealing with the 50-foot umbilical, which they jettisoned along with Collins' chest pack. Gemini 11 with astronauts Pete Conrad and Dick Gordon. Their mission was to dock to an Agena docking target, boost to the highest Earth orbit achieved by man, perform 2 EVAs like Gemini 10, and perform some orbital maneuvers tethered to the Agena. Also, their ascent will be a direct path to the target docking vehicle within one orbit to simulate the lunar module ascent from the surface to the command module. The direct ascent was a success, docking approximately 94 minutes after liftoff. After boosting into the higher orbit with an apogee being 853 miles or 1,373 kilometers, other than trips to the moon that held the highest orbit record until just recently on September 10th, 2024, real close to a year ago from when this was released. Polaris Dawn broke that record, going 870 miles, or 140 kilometers. Gemini 11 docked and undocked 4 times, and still had fuel for an unscheduled 5th after returning to a lower, more circular orbit. Gordon's first EVA was planned for 2 hours, involving attaching a 100-foot tether to the craft and the Agena, which was stored in the Agena docking collar. They wanted to see if it would passively stabilize by dangling the Agena below pointed at Earth in hope of gravity pulling more on the lower craft. Gordon did achieve attaching, but the EVA was cut short, only lasting half an hour, before once again the astronaut was extremely exhausted. Passive stabilization proved to be troublesome. The tether just wouldn't stay taut. They were able to fire the side thrusters, slowly rotating both craft like a pair of slow motion bolas. It created about 0.0015 G. The second EVA was just another stand-up through the hat, take more photos of Earth, stars, and clouds. It was not tiresome and lasted more than 2 hours. Now for Gemini 12, the final flight of the Gemini program. And NASA still hasn't shown that astronauts could work easily and efficiently outside the spacecraft. It was pitched that they could train underwater to achieve neutral buoyancy. There are conflicting reports of whose idea it was. From what I found, it seems credit went to Scott Carpenter and John Glenn. So, while the Gemini 12 crew prepared for their flight, NASA acquired the use of a high school pool. So, Jim Lovell will tell us how that went.
After Ed White's Gemini 4, which really didn't do much to learn about walking in space, they decided to do some pretty detailed work outside the spacecraft. Started with really Gemini 9. They're going to have an AMU, an astronaut maneuvering unit, and it was in the back of the spacecraft. Gene Cernan was going to do the work on it. They got outside and tried to do the work, and the handholds were not good, the toe holes, he heated up, his visor fogged over. He had trouble doing things which he could do easily in training. And so eventually he came back into the spacecraft and they abandoned that. They again attempted it on 10, not the AMU, but they attempted to do work on 10. What happened was that on 9 and 10, and then eventually also 11, when Dick Gordon was outside and he overheated and everything, all of us forgot about one of Newton's third laws of motion. To every action, there's an equivalent reaction. Consequently, when they went to touch the spacecraft repelled them. You don't see that on Earth, but you sure see that up in space in the zero gravity atmosphere when you have a big mass like the spacecraft. And so when 12 rolled around, they said, let's devote a lot of time on 12 to find out how we can really work outside the spacecraft. And it just so happened that someone, I don't know who it was, said, well, how about underwater? Wouldn't that give you sort of an idea of zero gravity if we can make the astronaut neutrally buoyant? And a spacesuit will work just as well underwater as it will in space. So NASA rented a swimming pool in a boys' school up in Baltimore. Buzz and I went up there with all the crew, and we put Buzz in a spacesuit, got him in the water, made him neutrally buoyant. I had communication with him, and I sat on the side of the pool as if I was inside the spacecraft, went through some of the basics. We had a crude mock-up in the water itself, learning about working in space, learning about the proper handholds and the proper toe holes to make sure that everything would work.
And everything did work out. The EVA was a success. Aldrin spent 2 hours and 20 minutes on a tethered spacewalk, where he photographed star fields, retrieved a micrometeorite collector, along with a few other chores. Gemini 12 also docked and undocked multiple times. Aldrin successfully used a sextant to calculate actions and level flew the craft accordingly. Due to a turbo pump malfunction, they weren't able to achieve a high orbit. And that wraps up the Gemini, or for us, the Sith programs. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to smash that like button, and I'll see you next time for a survey/Seeker moon landing. Goodbye.
Gracias.